Hello, I'm Caroline Fairchild, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. The alcohol industry has historically lacked diversity in regards to who it's marketed to, how it's made, and who owns the majority share of its production. But that's changing, and I have two guests right now to prove it. Joining me now is Dr. Nicolette. She is the founder and CEO of Pomp and Whimsy Jyn Lacour. She worked in the world of spirits innovation for over a decade through a brand strategy and consumer insights agency, Think Conservatory. She holds a BA in Human Sciences from the University of Oxford and a PhD in sociology from the Imperial College of London. Nicolette, it's so great to see you again. Welcome to LinkedIn News Live.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's bring our listeners in with us from the beginning of Pomp and Whimsy. You started this brand in 2015. What was the market opportunity that you were hoping to address?
Yeah, so I've been a researcher for most of my career. So I trained as a sociologist, and I've spent the last 20 years in the field of consumer insights and brand strategy. And one of the things that I always felt as a consultant to this industry was that women were really being left out of the cultural conversation on spirits. And I felt that at some time, one of the main reasons for that was that there just weren't really enough women behind the wheel and the creation, marketing, and selling of spirits. And it was at that time that I thought I would jump into the game.
And you wrote, I read that you thought about your pivot into production as not just a pivot, but more of an imperative. What about actually getting into the production process was necessary for you to make a change?
Well, I think that we are really fed a version of spirits that really comes from a fairly male-dominated world. And as a result, as I said, we as women, as consumers, are not only left out of the cultural conversation, but we're just not really taken seriously in general. And yes, as a woman, that's something that was frustrating. But as an entrepreneur, I felt that that was a huge missed opportunity, actually, that there was a lot of money being left on the table by not taking women seriously. So it was both a business imperative as well as a social imperative to bring more diversity to the industry.
Well, I want to get into the history of spirits, more specifically the history of gin, which you are such a guru in. I actually want to bring up something that you said recently in the New York Times to jumpstart that discussion. You said, I want women in the home to be recognized for the influence that they had and what the cocktail has become, is becoming, and will become. It's just as important how we drink at home with each other as it is in the bar. Nicolette, talk to us a little bit about how women have somehow been forgotten from the history of the cocktail and the history of gin in particular.
Yes, this was something that really struck me when I launched Pomp and Whimsy. As a researcher, I wanted to know everything about the history of the cocktail. And as I was reading more and more about it, I was just continuously struck that I felt that I was really only reading half the picture, and that what I was reading was a story that was written about bartenders, about the emergence of the cocktail and its cultural influence coming out of the bar, which at one time, as you probably know, was not a place where women were even allowed 100 or 150 years ago. And I felt that, again, this was really missing half of the picture. And as I started to dig into this myself, I actually uncovered an enormous amount of literature written by women at exactly the time that the cocktail was first becoming popular that showed very clearly to me that women were playing a really central role in the popularization of this phenomenon of the cocktail that we now know and love today.
And it's not just that women played a central role in the cocktail that we know today, but gin used to be called Mother Gin. What happened to the mother and what happened there?
Yes, so we go back in time 150, 200 years ago, and gin was very much a spirit that was made by women, sold by women, enjoyed by women, earning it the nickname Mother Gin. And at some point over the course of the next 100 years or so, women sort of gradually got written out of that story. And there was a degeneration in the story around women and gin that was really representative of the degeneration of the story of women and spirits in general. And somewhere along the line, when Mother Gin devolved into what we might remember as Mother's Ruin. And I really want to retell that story and go back to Mother Gin and restore women back to their mothership.
Well, that B-roll made me a little bit thirsty there, Nicolette. So I'm going to go ahead and say hello to some members who are joining us in the stream who I'm sure are thirsty as well. We have Mervyn from Texas joining us, Miriam from Pakistan, Anna from Romania, and Christine from New York City. And if you're just joining us here on LinkedIn News Live, we're having a conversation about the changing pace of the alcohol industry. I'm here with Dr. Nicolette. She's the founder and CEO of Pomp and Whimsy, an emerging gin brand that is very delicious. So if you have questions about what's going on in the world of spirits, let us know in the show and we'll get those questions answered. Let's talk about marketing to female consumers and how this has just been an old boys club for so long. You've talked about before how there's just this oversimplification of the female palate. Why does this continue to happen?
Well, I think that we have very outdated views about women as drinkers. I think that there is an assumption that women don't really enjoy spirits, that women are really more wine drinkers. And that's something that is just not borne out in the data. So we know that actually among female drinkers, 1 in 3 women actually prefer spirits and cocktails over wine and beer. And that's compared to 1 in 4 men. So it's actually more true to say that men are beer drinkers than it is to say that women are not cocktail and spirits drinkers. And I think there are a lot of reasons that go into why women are assumed, or we still have these kind of outdated views. A lot of it has to do with the fact that for the longest time, you couldn't really market spirits directly to women. There was an industry-wide moratorium on that. And so there's a long sort of cultural history and association of women and spirits that has made that challenging.
And you're changing that history right now while operating Pomp and Whimsy. How has that been during the pandemic? Give some of our viewers a little bit of a glimpse into some of the challenges or changes that you've seen just in this past year and change.
Yeah, I think that over the last year and a half, we've found ourselves in a de facto prohibition period where access to hospitality has been very limited. So for those of us who work in the industry, we've really been impacted on all sides, whether it is our supply chain, whether it is our route to market, or whether it is our marketing opportunities. The spirits industry and alcohol in general is a social industry. And in order to build brand awareness and consumer awareness, you need to be in front of people. You need to be able to share drinks with people. And that's obviously been very difficult. We, much like many other businesses over the last year, have pivoted a lot of that online as much as we possibly can. And the good thing is that when you take a consumer-centric approach and you recognize that even if the channels are complicated, the consumer is still there. As long as you're still able to reach them, then you can still have a business. And for us, that's meant a lot of growth actually over the last year.
And that growth also has to do with a lot of consumers look like me in terms of being female. Nicolette, from your seat, are there more women entering the wine and spirits game? What are you seeing from inside the industry?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the great thing about where we are right now. I would say there's actually never been a better time than there is right now to be a woman in the industry. Not only do we have a consumer base that is actively looking to support more diverse founders and more diverse businesses and brands in general, but we have an industry that is really opening up to it as well. And so I'm very happy to say that there are many more women who are coming into the industry at every level, which is really exciting.
Well, Nicolette, thank you so much for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. I'm a big fan of Pomp and Whimsy and a big fan of you, and can't wait to see you do what you do from here.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me.
That was Dr. Nicolette. She's the founder and CEO of Pomp and Whimsy, Jyn Lacour. All right, let's take a different look at this game from a CEO who's trying to change a legacy brand from within. I want to bring in Rodney Williams. He's the CEO of Belvedere Vodka. He's been in the LVMH family for over 10 years, winning 5 gold can lines along the way. He's earned a BA from Amherst College and his MBA from Northwestern University's Kellogg School. Rodney, welcome to LinkedIn News Live.
Thank you, Caroline. Great to be with you.
It's great to see you. And you've been in the alcohol game for quite some time, almost over a decade at this point. What brought you into the industry?
Really serendipity. I went out to California for a .com that turned into a .bomb, and then got hired, fortunately, by Robert Mondavi at the time up in Napa, because they were really looking for classical marketers, and I came out of Procter & Gamble and Johnson & Johnson, so it sort of fit that bill.
Well, there's not a better place really to start in the wine industry than Robert Mondavi. So that's a good place to start right there. I want to get your take before we dive into the world of Belvedere on what I was just discussing with Nicolette, was just really just the gender game right now with marketing to female consumers versus male consumers. You've been leading this charge for quite some time. How has it changed in your career? What are you seeing now?
Yeah, we've seen a huge evolution, and I thought the previous conversation really touched on some important points. I think 10 years ago, when we first started the Never Stop, Never Settle campaign back for the Hennessy business in the U.S., we made the concerted effort to include Erykah Badu in the launch of that. And I think, fast forward a decade later, here in Belvedere, we've been working with Janelle Monáe, who is an actor, singer, but also an activist, and really was a great spokesperson for charting new territories and inviting new people into the franchise of Belvedere and Vodka. And so what I think we're seeing is a real opening and embrace from the industry itself to different sorts of voices who can really break through to new consumer groups.
And speaking of those voices, how have consumption habits changed, particularly with vodka, since you started in your career? I also, if you have any insights into Hennessy as well, would love to hear that.
Yeah. So globally, vodka remains, and in the U.S. as well, the biggest category or segment within the spirits industry. And depending on the country, it can be as much as 25 to 30% of all spirits consumption is vodka. So it's very big. And Belvedere plays in sort of the super premium tier, the top tier of the category itself. And it's grown quite rapidly in some other parts of the world than perhaps it has in the US. And we see sort of a cyclical factor where typically young adults want to drink something different from their parents. And where we've been fortunate is that younger consumers, millennials, Gen Zs coming of age and drinking age are really interested in premiumization and crafted spirits. And that's the part of the arena that we play. And what we see is that these consumers are entering this space at a much younger age than I did. They're skipping the swill and they're going right to the good stuff, which is fantastic. And we really encourage that because it really supports this idea of savoring versus binge drinking.
Yeah, and if you're in a business that's something all the generations can agree on, that seems like a good business to be in, Rodney. I'm going to quickly say hello to some members who are joining us in the stream before we continue this conversation. We have Phil from Chicago, Alana from Brooklyn, Robert from Massachusetts, and Constance from Miami. If you're just joining the stream, I'm here with Rodney Williams. He's the CEO of Belvedere Vodka. We're talking about the changing face of the alcohol industry and its diversification. So if you have questions about any of that or want to get to know Rodney a little bit more, let us know your questions in the stream and we'll get them answered on the show. Rodney, speaking of the diversity of the industry, there are a few brands that have come out more strongly in support of the Black community and Black excellence than Hennessy over the summer with their recent ad with Nas. I want to let the members in the stream take a quick look of just a little bit of the ad, and then I'll get your perspective on it.
Dear Destiny, standing still, scared to death, holding you in my hands, I knew. I wanted you to see something I never saw, feel something our family had never grasped. Black excellence. Something like the Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1921. 40 acres and 35 blocks of Black folks running the town. Lawyers, doctors, businesses, all Black owned. Imagine that.
From the inside of LVMH, what did that ad mean to you, Rodney?
Well, I think it was huge. I mean, it's very emotional. And it's a clear response to sort of the tragedies of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and what we all experience as a country, if not globally, and really wanting to champion additional narratives that embraced the Black community. And I think the Hennessy team has done a just terrific job of finding a way of being very elevating and inviting at the same time, and sort of adding a whole nother dimension to historical awareness that maybe some consumers weren't aware of.
And as a longtime marketer, whether we're talking inside or outside of the alcohol industry, did you, when you started your career, did you think that you've ever seen an ad like that go on national television?
Well, probably not. So it's encouraging that, you know, we've evolved to this point. But I think, you know, one has to recognize that in order to really drive a brand and stand out, you have to stand for something. And this is a clear example of a brand really standing for empowerment and inclusion in a historical way and a very emotive way.
And I wanted to get your take a little bit on what I've seen you speak out on the past, which is just unconscious bias, making it challenging for Black professionals to succeed both inside and outside of the alcohol industry. How has that unconscious bias shown up, if at all, in your own career? And do you see things changing even within your own industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, what's true of professionals of color and of women in business is you're held to a pretty high standard. And so the ability to really take risks comes with, you know, quite some pitfalls when you fail. And failure is an endemic part of business. We all take risks that don't always pan out. So that is a particular challenge. Now, what I've seen that's, you know, incredibly encouraging, and Nicolette talked about this previously, is that as we've gotten better data, better recognition of who are the consumers who aren't just consuming our product, but also influencing others, it's really sort of opened the aperture of how core audiences are defined, and it's become much more inclusive of consumers of color, of women, and enable brands to also sort of parse, you know, what it would have been as recently as 5 years ago, you know, taboo sort of territories of intersectionality and other aspects of diversity that just weren't popularly discussed. So I think it's incredibly encouraging progress that we've reached this point, and still yet there's a huge opportunity. When you look at wine and spirits in particular, you know, African Americans and Latinx communities over index in terms of consumption. And so there's still an opportunity to have more people from those communities involved in the business side.
Well, speaking of opportunity and consumption, a lot more consumers are thinking about sustainability when it comes to the alcohol that they're drinking. And Belvedere, in many ways, has led the way. Talk to us about some of your initiatives, a 42% reduction in CO2 since 2012. How did you help push some of these initiatives forward?
Well, and I have to give my predecessors some credit here, too. It's been a long commitment that Belvedere has had to being environmentally conscious and a good community player. So we were the first distillery to win a green energy grant in 2018 from the European Commission. And we brought online earlier this year a biomass capture facility. So we're able to take the heat and the steam from the distillation process and convert that into clean energy that then powers the distillery. So by the end of Q1 of next year, we will be carbon neutral, energy carbon neutral, as we produce vodka. And when we're not distilling, we're in the process of connecting to the local community's electricity grid so that we can provide them with clean energy as well. This is a whole development, Caroline. Like when we started it, you know, even just 3 years ago, consumers were only tangentially interested in, but now we find it to be hugely relevant and topical coming out of the pandemic.
Well, what I was going to ask you is that you recently launched the first all-natural, 100% certified organic project in the entire global Moet Hennessy portfolio. How many consumers are actually looking for that on the bottle? And let's talk real here. Is this really something that people are picking up the bottle and saying, I'm only going to drink this if this is this and that?
Well, you'd be surprised. So when we first did the research on this, it was focused towards younger consumers, younger millennials, Gen Zs, and for whom organic was a purchase decision driver. Coming out of the pandemic, what we are finding is, in part because some of these guys were at home and influencing their parents, it's become a bigger opportunity. Part of it is driven by the fact that people are very aware of the ingredients they're putting in their body. And, Belvedere has always been all natural. Poland appellates or regulates vodka production the way the US or France or Italy does wine production, such that we can have no additives in the product, no added sugar, no emulsifiers. But in terms of organic itself, I think what's valuable about it is it's validated by third parties, by the USDA, by the EU. And so when people see that insignia on the bottle, they really recognize it's gone through a very, very high vetting standard of quality. And I think that's what's happening now. When you look at gluten-free, well, first of all distilled spirits, for the record, are gluten-free. But there may be about 4% of the American population has a gluten allergy, but people see it as a quality cue. Increasingly, that's what's happening with organic and natural.
Well, I stand corrected here, Rodney, because you're really resonating with our members right now. Christine says this is so interesting. Brand identity goes a long way to inclusivity. Robert says Belvedere is a class act. I'm an old-time bartender here. And John says this is the coolest thing I've heard in a while now. So thanks for those who are joining us in the stream right now. Rodney, you're pushing forward a lot of these efforts during a global pandemic, no less. I'd love to hear how Belvedere's business has been impacted by supply chain losses, by challenges that just everyone is facing right now with this pandemic.
Yeah, well, like the hospitality channel, we really suffered during the pandemic with restaurant, bars, and nightclubs being closed. We pivoted quickly to try to find ways to add value and support that community by creating batching programs. So bartenders, sort of make every cocktail bespoke on the spot and aren't so practiced at combining ingredients that will have to sit for a long time in advance. So we were able to provide some of those tools. But luckily for Belvedere, our retail sales were through the roof, and we've done incredibly well in terms of e-retail and e-commerce during the pandemic. But we're very excited for the trade to get back on its feet and move forward. When we first came up with our whole Made with Nature platform, which was really informing consumers about the fact that Belvedere is all natural and has no additives. It was to break in May of last year. So we thought, wow, our timing could not be worse with the pandemic. But we went ahead and released the messaging anyway. And what we found was a huge receptivity to it, in part because everyone is thinking about what they're eating and wanting to be, a little bit more wholesome and holistic in the products that they consume.
And Rodney, I'm seeing a ton of members joining us in the stream right now who are managers. I want to get your take on how the pandemic has just changed your leadership style in terms of anything that you've learned this past year that you're going to take forward in your career.
Yeah, there's always been a truism that good ideas come from anywhere. And I think one of the positive things that can be said about Zoom culture, about this whole virtual culture, is that it's sort of leveled the playing field where everyone is on screen at the same time. It felt less hierarchical in terms of communications, and we had to over communicate. My offices and part of the team are here in New York, and the distilleries, and 45 minutes outside of Warsaw in Poland. So we really, really had to over communicate, if you will, to stay in touch during this time. And what we found was that, some great ideas in terms of how best to move forward, some practices that we could tweak and change, were coming from young members and less senior members of the organization. And we hope that continues, going forward. But it's very encouraging.
I'm sure it will continue. Rodney, thank you so much for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. I'm seeing from the stream that this is resonating so much, so thanks for joining us. That was Rodney Williams. He's the CEO of Belvedere Vodka. And I'm seeing a lot of you have a lot of excitement about this topic. So if you want to continue the conversation, be sure to check out the news module to the right of your LinkedIn feed. Or if you're in mobile, you can click into that search box. All right. Tomorrow, my colleague Andrew Seaman will be with you to speak with one expert who has all the tips in your career headed in the right direction. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thanks for watching LinkedIn News Live.